Okay, I just changed the input for the sound. It looks like it's picking up my sound now. Um, for those of you who are virtual, we will wait to confirm if you can hear us now. Thank you, everyone. I apologize for the technical issues. I will just run quickly through what I had said earlier because I know those of you who are virtual missed it. My name's Kendall. Welcome to the HMS Principal Forum. I will be serving as the moderator and I'll be joined by members of our hiring committee. You saw on the screen earlier a list of our committee members. We do have a few who are here in person. As many of you know, our committee has worked quickly to review and evaluate candidates. So you saw an overview of the process, and then our bios were listed as well, so you could click on the bios to review the candidates. We will be bringing each candidate in one at a time. And the questions being asked today were submitted via the HMS community survey completed at the beginning of the principal search process. So currently we are just waiting for our first candidate to get on. So just a moment while we get that sorted. Hi, Richard. Sorry for that delay. Thank you for being here. I just want to make sure that we can hear you okay.
I can hear you if you can hear me.
Great. All right, so we are going to get right into it with we'll have you do a brief introduction and then we'll get right into it with our first question.
Okay. Thank you. Hello, everybody. My name is Richard Gowers. I believe you have my bio, so I won't go over that. By means of introduction, may I just say thank you to everyone for being there, as well as the staff and the students that I got to speak with today. I've greatly enjoyed getting to learn about the school and your community and some of the questions you have around the areas of growth for our middle school. So I'm really excited to talk to you about what I think of about education and the environments of success for students, and how I can best, if selected, be a colleague who could work towards those goals. So thanks so much for spending the time to allow me to be here from the other side of the country. So that's greatly appreciated. Thanks so much.
It's nice to see you again. Can you hear me?
I can. Hello.
Great. So I think I'm kicking off the questions. So the first question is, what is your vision for HMS? And in your answer, please consider academics, socio-emotional learning, and the Hunt philosophy of teaching and learning belief statements that were shared with you.
Well, if I was to state that in a sentence, it would be to create a safe and supportive learning environment that supports high achievement for all students in an environment in which they could thrive. So I guess I could give you like the quick answer to that, but I'd also like to expand upon that if I may. But what I mean by that is my vision for HMS is a general vision for education at PUB, which is a place where students can feel safe. I mean that physically, I mean that emotionally, I mean that intellectually, in a space where they can feel supported in who they are, how they learn, how they approach learning, the questions they have, their background being respected, there being a sense of trust throughout the community that they're a part of, they're a school that respects that for them, that they be in a school which is supporting high achievement for all students. We want to make sure that all the students can find success in how they learn. We can support them at the highest bar we can. I know from talking or reading about the district-wide discussions about having students be on grade level in math, my philosophy would be that would be ideally 100%. And not only that, but grade level in everything. And in fact, part of my vision for HMS would be to create and help to cultivate a culture of learners that would create a great problem for the high school principal to have in students who are coming in with tremendous abilities to be successful in ways they could thrive in that environment as well. And thrive being the optimal word, right? But I guess I would also say this to that question, because I think generically what are our values is the question we ask of every school. And everything that I've read in the core values and belief of HMS, I would certainly ascribe to and support. And I think part of my vision for HMS is to support that vision, is to make sure that we are committed to those values, and those values are evident, that we are a place that shows how much we're committed to student learning, that shows the welcome we have to our students, that even literally welcomes them in any number of different facets when they come into the space of this school, and that I could work to help to embed amongst the practices of the school those values in everything that is done. So I think my vision for HMS is to work in support of the vision that's already been articulated by the values that you have expressed, and to work hard to realize them for all stakeholders in the community.
That I think I have the first chunk of questions here. So the next one is, in your previous work, how have you created innovative and inclusive learning environments for all students? And please provide specific examples if you can.
So thinking about that, on the one hand, I could say innovative could be the way in which at our school we have worked to try to expand curricular offerings to our students. That at the high school level, our students were getting beyond where they usually were, and we had to find new ways of creating and supportive curricular development to actually find ways of supporting that intellectual curiosity of our students. I think I would also point to the ways in which we have as a school tried to innovate how we instruct, how we approach learning, how we support different learning styles, which really I think get to that notion of inclusiveness. My perspective on inclusiveness comes from divergent learning styles, that all students can find equity in how they learn, and working with those patterns of success for students to create that space in which everyone is included. I mean, part of that for our school was actually creating a student government, a student council, where everybody is welcome to be a participant in that, which actually is a place which might cross over in our environment, just as it is in our population right now, between students who are neurotypical learners and those who are nonverbal learners, but nevertheless share that space because they share the community together and they share that space as a school together. So trying to do what we can to make that inclusion respective of that. When I was thinking about that, what I also thought about was on Earth Day at our school, we planted a garden, right? And part of the reason that I want us to plant a garden was because it's almost like having a focal point for an included school community in an environment that says, and I will admit, I found this and I kind of ripped it off from the nursery store that had this above a bunch of seed packets. But nevertheless, I like the philosophy, which was about planting a seed is an optimistic idea about the future. And for us, it was, okay, well, if we're an inclusive learning community and we plant a garden, can we actually collectively secure it and collectively continue to have it grow as an aspect of how one community of students can pass it on to the next? So those sort of subtle things of trying to make it seem like everybody in our community is in the same boat together is what I have always tried to do as an educator to make our place feel inclusive. As much as I could talk about innovation to practices or curricular approaches, it's about that sense of culture and inclusiveness for me. And because I like the garden and I wanted to have like some nice tomatoes for our lunchtime barbecues.
Ripping off in it. There's not ripping off in education. There's just learning from, right?
I'll see.
My last question is, in Burlington, we're committed to addressing racism in all its forms and dismantling white supremacy culture. Please describe how you demonstrate your commitment to anti-racism at the personal, the social, and the systemic levels.
I would hope that in how I present myself to my fellow citizens, whatever their age, that I am modeling inclusiveness, acceptance, tolerance, or the practices of our democracy, which I would want to be embodying, as well as a recognition that everybody's journey to this point encompasses different challenges, and some of those reflect some incredibly difficult systematic aspects of our community we need to overcome. So I would want to know, I guess I want to know personally, that personally it's something which I am on board with, that logic of trying to dismantle a system which hasn't worked for all as it's supposed to have. Probably another part of that, intellectually, right? My background is in history. That's what my studies are in. That was a study about the extent to which American history has been a site of contestation about what it means to be an American, and that successive generations of Americans have had to find answers to that question, and that's involved many times aspects of exclusion and inclusion, and that has been evolving, and it's a process of unfolding which always requires, I guess, every generation to think through again, are we actually living up to our democratic values? So I think my personal is also connected with my intellectual, in that sense, a commitment to that process. All I could say about what I have done systematically to that is, well, I want to transition from being in a private school setting to a public school setting, to work in that facet of democracy which public education commits to, which is what unites us as our geography. And it means we all have to work together to find a culture which is truly inclusive towards actually functioning as a better democratic system of values. So all I could say to what I have tried to do systematically to that is that I would like to move across the country to work and live in Burlington to support the ambition you have to create the next generation of students from our middle school who ascribe to values which I think could get us to a better future than the one we've got to at this point. So that's, I think, how best I could possibly answer that question.
I just want to jump in and say we have about 5 questions left.
5 minutes.
We can go a little bit over, so maybe 10 to 13 minutes left. I just wanted to make sure the time, Richard.
I would try to speak very, very quickly as best I can. Hello again.
Hi, Richard.
Hello. Yeah. I can see you. Yes. Hello.
Nice to see you again.
And you.
This question has three parts. Roughly a quarter of our students receive special education services through their individualized education plan, and other students have individualized plans to ensure their language acquisition, health, and other needs are met. How do you meet the diverse needs of all students, meeting them at their level, making sure they are challenged, and that they spend most of their time with their peers?
My initial answer to that would be how I do that is to work with those teachers in those support services that are dedicated to that specifically, I guess would be one way to answer that. That I want, if we have students who are in differentiated education or special education or have IEPs, that they actually, I can work with and try to support the students so they could, the teachers, sorry, the support personnel, that they can ensure those students do have what they need to be successful according to their IEPs and make sure those things are respected across their entire educational journey in a school. So it's partly what I can do is to articulate this need, to support that need, and to support as best I can the teachers who are on the front lines of delivering that. And if that means listening and talking to them about potentials for, say, code teaching or how we can better embed students on IMPs in other classrooms, or what we can possibly do to make sure this is actually creating a school as opposed to a couple of different schools, then that's how I would approach the best way I could try to find a support for that process.
Thank you. Second part, what role have you played on IEP 504 or educational support team in developing student plans?
So I've been part of those meetings. I have had any number of IEPs across my desk. I am, WASC scores and WISC scores and all these kind of things is something that I'm used to having to articulate as well as understand and be a part of the process of finding support for students. So it's definitely something that I have been involved with. The community that I'm at, probably the same population, if not a little bit more, are on IEPs. So that need to, if students are transitioning into our school, understand what they're coming in with in terms of accommodations, how best we can support them, but also be a part of moments when students are in high school, but discovering they have a learning difference and how we can best support that process of, okay, now we have to adjust things because we have, for example, realized a diagnosis which requires accommodation. So that process of being involved with is something that I am, has been a pretty large part of my job today.
And then the third part of this question, as the principal of HMS and acting LEA, how would you navigate through these meetings? How do you ensure that all families can be active participants in developing their students' plan, including those who are new to the process and families who might not speak English?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in those meetings. Those meetings are stressful. I've been in a couple that have breached a school with a district. And I think part of that has to do with ensuring that basic levels of translation are present. In the examples I could speak to, it did involve families where Spanish was their first language and ensuring that there was a translator there. But not just that, but prior to the meeting, the information had been shared with parents in advance of that, so they could have a clearer sense of what was going to be discussed in their first language, so that could be giving them a sense of real understanding of it. And the only other thing I could speak to about that is I kind of have thought about this idea of probably trying to express more education for everybody about what that process means, and even the extent to which we could liaise more forcefully with all parents about what this process entails. That for some parents who are undergoing this IEP process, it can feel, or they have expressed to me, this sense of there is something wrong with my child, and there's nothing wrong with your child. It's about a process which is trying to find the right way to express how best we can support you in this change of learning profile. And that can be better done through maybe liaising more, but also being part of an ongoing process for those families, rather than just, oh, we're having an IEP meeting, here's the document, it's been translated, best of luck. I think it is being a much more overt support network for a family that wants to understand how their students' learning is going to be affected by this change of plan.
Thank you. Next question. Describe your ability with examples of a time when you were asked to bring people together, heal, and create a climate and culture that is restorative. If you don't have an example, describe how you would prepare to approach this critical and necessary work.
Yeah, so my example for that would actually be the school where I am. A lot of families come into it having gone through that stress around their students' learning needs. And in fact, they are coming into an environment that the first job we can do for them is actually make them feel as if they can be successful. And that's part of the healing process, is actually to recognize that where they were wasn't working for them, not because of the student, but because of something about the system wasn't working. So I've been a part of, I guess, that process of healing by creating that climate of support for them. And it's not me, it's everybody at the school that I'm involved with. So they can find success, which then helps them to heal after that experience. My other sort of way to answer that question would be, I am more than happy to admit that since I started thinking about Burlington and reading about your school, that I've also started my own sort of exploration of restorative justice practices and trying to learn about it and trying to be exposed to it and engaging in webinars about it as a first step, because I know the district has been pushing that in Burlington, and many of you are probably ahead of me on that. And that if I understand correctly, the second part of my webinar was also today. So I hope they recorded it, because I had to be in a forum with you guys, which was very important. So I was there. But what I've learned to this point about that in terms of creating that culture is this difference between a practice and a paradigm. That if you really want to create a process of healing in a community, it's the difference between oil and water and dye and water. This was the analogy that was given to me. That it's a paradigm shift. It's actually embedding those practices amongst the community rather than saying, have something we do. It's actually the entire approach needs to be rethought and reworked. So it's actually a lot of work. So the best I could say to that is I have certainly been involved in moments of stress and recovering a sense of confidence for students. But my journey on doing a better job of that is at its infancy, but it's what I'm committed to doing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there, Richard.
Hello.
Great, Sally again. Good to see you again.
Hello.
Hi. So being a clear communicator was raised as the most important characteristic of Hunt's Next principle. Please describe your communication style with staff and families. How do you handle conflict when it arises?
Well, I like to be present. So I am someone that likes to be around, be accessible, to have an open door to my space where people can feel comfortable talking with me. I'm somebody that would want to be accessible to parents and students and faculty on the location of the school by being the person they could see. I think that's a part of it. I'd want to be accessible through all the other ways of accessibility and let people know that I am attentive to the phone, attentive to emails, that I have the willingness and interest in communicating with them. That the very best what I could do is build a community of trust with those who I work with. So if I haven't answered them yet, at least they know me well enough to know that I'm working on it. But I think partly it's actually just trying to be present and be accessible and be attentive to what I'm seeing and listening to as a way of trying to make sure that I can properly communicate. And I think you had a second part to that question, and I'm pretty sure I forgot what it was.
No, I think you probably heard the second part. The first part was, please describe your communication style with staff and families. And how do you handle conflict when it arises?
Okay. All I could add is that I only communicate in Australian English, which for some people can, be difficult to understand.
All right, thank you. What have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate with families to ensure that they understand what is happening at school, know how to participate when there are needs, and have tools to support their students' learning?
Well, I think, we've tried social media, regular media, newsletters, all those type of things to tie in through a website, what we're doing at a school with our families. I think probably the answer to your question, not to dodge it, is I would first need to know what's the best way to communicate with families of HMS, because I don't presume to know everything about the community. I could be in a situation where I am putting things on a newsletter, but accessibility to the internet is not where it is around here, or that level of communication is not where it is around here. So maybe actually having direct information going back from students is the better way to communicate with all families. Similarly, with the extent to which that information can be communicated in all the languages that we speak at that school. So I would need to learn more about and understand more about how people already perceive communication from administration of the school and the school in general, and how best I can reach them, which partly I think would be actually, again, being present, being there, being someone who can help to bridge those gaps. So I could find exactly, I guess that's like holistically how I communicate with a family, but also how I could work to better understand from their perspective what they see as their needs, from their perspective what they see about the tools they need to support student learning. If that's as simple as this work is assigned to a book, but we don't have it, can we do it some other way? How is this work delivered? How can I work with that? So I think I would actually, as much as I could attest to multiple ways to try to communicate, I would want to first try to understand how best I can reach everybody who's a part of that community, so I can help understand how best we can deliver the information we need to have, because we're trying to knit everybody together in a community, and I don't want to exclude.
Thank you. What expectations would you set for teacher communication?
I've always, as best I can, liked the idea that as much as we can, it can feel like everybody goes to the same school. So I know that some teachers communicate differently to others in terms of frequencies, but sometimes, at least at our school I should speak to, there's been such a disparity that it feels like you're going to different schools because a math teacher communicates this way and a science teacher communicates another way. So I think it would be trying to actually, again, talk and listen and see what methods of communication are going, what would be an appropriate frequency, if you like, in terms of how students' work is being communicated to families, how teachers can best facilitate communicating that to families, that we try to find a method which works for all parties, that is successful, whether that's through, I think it's Power School or Schoolology. Forgive me, I don't quite remember what you guys use. But that sort of, be trying to make it consistent across the school setting in terms of the granular communication about what's happening in a class, as well as all I would say to that point is stressing the need that communication with families is a communication tool to provide good news as well as bad, that it isn't just an aspect of, oh my goodness, the teacher's calling or the school's calling, this must by default be bad news. It is, no, this is a process of trying to tie in parents into understanding what the goals of a class are and how students are realizing it. And that's similarly a way of congratulating through messaging, as similarly as it is to talking about how we might need to discuss further aspects. But that's how I would probably approach that.
Thank you. And finally, are there any closing comments that you'd like to share?
Yes, I would like to say that I am very grateful for all the questions that have come across Zoom and Google Meets across the last day, but also the time before that. And I guess to let people know that I am by nature a self-reflective, ruminative, I hope, thoughtful person. So the questions that have been asked of me haven't just, or won't just go away. And since I've answered that, right? I understand this is a process of answering your questions, but I don't profess to have answered them now, so I don't have to rethink them, that I'm grateful for the chance to keep thinking about them and think about how I can continue my journey as an educator in support of students. So I'm grateful that the questions were asked, and I'm going to think on them for a while. So I'm appreciative of that. And the only last thing I would say is that, of course, I know this is like there's a job at the end of it, and gracious me, I hope it's me. But by the way, I just want to let you know that I am being really grateful for the chance to meet with you all and talk with you all. And whomever you choose, I wish nothing but the best for the next part of the journey for Hunter Middle School. And it's been my privilege to have a chance to talk with you all and to learn more about your community. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to have a chat with you all.
Thank you.
Richard, that is the end of what we have for you. I want to thank you so much for participating today and for your patience. I know the technology piece of it has been a little tough, but
Okay, thanks so much for setting it up.
yeah, thank you so much for being here, and we'll be in touch soon.
Okay, have a good night. Bye.
Thanks, you too. Okay, I'm just gonna take a moment to resituate our computer so that we are set up for the next two candidates as they will be in person. For those of you who are in person and for those of you to know online, what I'm gonna have you do for the next set of questions for both the candidates, you don't need to come and stand behind the podium. We'll have the candidate just stay here so that they can stay in frame. The microphone is going to stay where it is. It looks like it's still picking me up here. I hope people can hear me okay. I'm gonna spin it a little bit. But if you come up to the same spot that you were going to, the microphone will pick you up so that the people online will be able to hear you. Okay, so our next candidate is here. Nikki, if you want to come up. So we are hybrid. So we have our webinar going here. So we're going to have you stay kind of in front of the podium so that the people online can see you. Feel free to give a brief introduction of yourself and then we'll get right into the questions.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Nikki Ellis. I am a proud transgender school leader, and I am the assistant principal currently at EMS. And I'm really excited for this opportunity to be here.
Up here for the microphone, but I have the first set of questions and I hope you're feeling better. It's nice to see you again. I know.
Thank you.
So the first question is, what is your vision for HMS? And in your answer, please consider academics, socio-emotional learning, and the Hunt philosophy of teaching and learning belief statements that were shared.
So before I answer this question, I want to provide my why I see the vision for HMS the way that I do. And that vision started when I was a kid. And my older brother really struggled to feel a sense of belonging in school, starting in middle school. He had an IEP. He got into a lot of fights, and he was suspended regularly, starting in middle school, all through high school, to the point where he dropped out of school and ultimately ended up incarcerated. So I have some firsthand experiences with the school to prison pipeline. And so when I explain my vision to you, I want you to know that I take school discipline very seriously, in that I don't believe in suspensions, and I am committed to the district's goal of reducing suspensions to 0, because I have seen and utilized other practices that help students to maintain the warmth of the community, which is the central focus of my vision for HMS. So when I think about what HMS could be, I think about a sense of belonging and the warmth of a fire for the entire community, starting with students. And that means every student. Feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling understood, feeling like their interests and their hopes and their passions are represented in the way that adults talk to them, what they learn about every single day, and how the school culture looks. And that means students staying part of the community rather than being kicked out of the community. And that is something that I believe in with conviction. And I'll talk a little bit more about how I see restorative culture aligning to that vision. But the other pieces that are really important to me in a school vision for HMS are making sure that there are rigorous student-centered classrooms where students are doing the heavy cognitive thinking and teachers are just guiding the work, and that the curriculum represents the interests and the needs of the students, but that students have the opportunity to learn together because learning is social. And we know that middle schoolers are social and need to be able to learn by making meaning with each other. And that means that the teacher is no longer directly instructing from the front of the room all the time. Students are problem solving, they're working in teams, they're talking to each other, and they're grappling with real world questions. So that's the instructional piece of my vision for HMS, which also includes the proper scaffolds and supports, behaviorally and academically, for every single student. Another piece of the vision that's really essential to me is visibility. Many of our students have marginalized identities, and being transgender, I know firsthand what visibility means for kids. I know that this district has never had a transgender leader before, and I really want to be the first one because I didn't see anyone who looked like me or had experiences that I have when I was in middle school. And I know that if I had, I would have had a different trajectory to my life. And I want to make sure that students who are of the global majority, staff who are of the global majority, staff with identities that are marginalized feel central to power and decision-making and voice within the community so that we can work toward the district's goal of retaining BIPOC staff and making sure that other staff with marginalized identities also feel safe and supported every single day. Finally, the well-being of students and staff are essential to my work, and that's why relationships are essential to my work. I work hard to get to know every single person that I come in contact with as a school leader personally, because I believe that you can't move someone's work, you can't get someone to grow and change if you don't know them, if you don't know what their fears, their hopes, their dreams, their interests are outside of school. And so those are the pieces that are foundational to me in thinking about a vision for HMS, and having all of those pieces seen through an anti-racist lens that interrogates white supremacy culture as it shows up in our building, as it shows up in curriculum and instruction and behavior systems, that we're always interrogating what we do to make sure that it's what's best for kids.
Thank you. The next question is, in your previous work, how have you created innovative and inclusive learning environments for all students? And again, please provide specific examples if you can.
So I'm going to start with a recent example from EMS, where I'm currently the assistant principal. In looking at behavior data and suspension data from past years, I realized that there were some patterns to who was being pushed out of the classroom, who was being pushed out of the school. And the reality was that students of the global majority and students with IEPs were the ones being pushed out of school repeatedly. And in order to help a student to feel the warmth of the community, you have to involve them in the community and in leadership. And so one of the programs that I was able to enact at EMS is a peer mediator program, where the students who had negative interactions with the behavior systems in the past were asked to share their experiences and invited to be peer mediators in the community to help resolve conflict and harm as they show up in our school. So that's 18 students in grades 6 through 8 who previously didn't see themselves as leaders in our community, who now hold the very important title of community mediators, and they are paid for that work, and they receive training, and they are showing leadership, and behavior and disciplinary challenges have decreased to 0 because those students feel involved, invested, and interested in their education because they are driving the work that we do as a community. So that has created innovation because I see restorative culture as the foundation to help kids to access instruction. If there's not a restorative culture and a truly restorative culture where everyone feels seen and heard and valued, and we confront harm and conflict when it occurs, then they don't feel safe in the classroom to take risks and to learn, which is the same for staff, not feeling safe to take risks and to learn. And so that is one of the pieces of creating that learning environment. Another example I'd like to provide is from my work as an equity coach in Des Moines Public Schools. In that role, I was tasked with supporting school administrators in buildings to enact equity audits and to fill in the gaps where students with marginalized identities were not getting the opportunities that they needed to access their learning. And so in that role, in one particular building, 90% of the Black boys in grades 9 through 12 were chronically absent, meaning they spent most of their time not in class, in the hallways, at school, but not in the classroom. And so I started to talk to those boys, and I started to ask them, what is keeping you from being part of your learning or being interested in the learning that's happening in the classroom? And what I found is that they didn't feel represented. They didn't feel like they fit to the culture of the classroom. They didn't feel like they were invested in the curriculum because it didn't represent them. And so what we did is I worked with 70 boys over the course of 6 weeks, twice a week for 30 minutes. And we utilized a lot of resources about culturally responsive teaching to give them the language of culturally responsive teaching. And then once a month during professional development time on early release days, those 70 boys sat side by side with teachers and looked at their lesson plans with them and provided feedback using the language of culturally responsive teaching. So it directly created an investment and a sense of belonging within the community. And it also provided helpful feedback to teachers to change their instruction to meet the needs of their learners. And then finally, the students who were involved in that process received iPads, and we created an instructional walkthrough tool together. And those boys got to walk through every single classroom and use the instructional walkthrough tool to give feedback and to see if culturally responsive instruction was actually happening or not. And so that led to a decrease of the chronic absenteeism rate of 60% in 3 months. So those are some of the ways that I work really hard to make sure that every single student within a school feels seen, and heard, and valued, and invested in.
Thank you. Last one from me. So in Burlington, we're committed to addressing racism in all its forms and dismantling white supremacy culture. You alluded to this a little bit, but could you please describe in more detail how you demonstrate your commitment to anti-racism at the personal, social, and systemic levels?
Yeah, so I'll start with the personal level. I recognize my white privilege, and although I have a marginalized identity, race is not one of the identities that I have that's marginalized. And so I spend time listening and sitting with the global majority staff and students in my community to hear from them what the needs are, what they want to see, what the problems that are plaguing our system are, so that I can do better work as a leader to make sure that we're being accountable to meeting their needs. You know, I've done a lot of work in texts like Me and White Supremacy, which is a text that is a journaling book where you think about and interrogate white supremacy within yourself. And, you know, I'm always committed to listening and learning and consuming resources by global majority scholars about this work. When it comes to this work socially, I am making the commitment to create a safe space in the school for staff of the global majority and students of the global majority who have felt marginalized in the past. I'd like to synthesize some data from a recent survey that Burlington School District did. It is the restorative practices survey that we provide to students and staff twice a year. And on that most recent survey, over 65% of students at HMS said they had seen discrimination in some form within their school. And another 35% of HMS students said they had experienced some type of discrimination in this school, which means that this school needs a leader who's going to be accountable to difficult conversations and systemic change that meet the needs of all of our students. And that's, again, something that I'm very committed to by making the space to listen and learn from and take feedback and create space for the global majority staff and students in this building to help lead the work and lead the community. And that rolls into how I see this work systemically. The peer mediator program is one example of how I systematically approach anti-racism. And some of the other ways that I approach it are, I'd like to enact a system where staff learn about white supremacy culture at the beginning of the year. And then we look for white supremacy culture in every meeting space, in every professional development, in every PLC, so that we can confront it and change it. But that means helping staff to understand how white supremacy culture shows up in education, in classrooms, in hallways, in the building, in order to be able to change it.
Good to see you.
Hi.
First question has 3 parts.
It's a long question.
It is, yes. Roughly a quarter of our students receive special education services through their individualized education plan, and other students have individualized plans to ensure their language acquisition, health, and other needs are met. Part 1. How do you meet the diverse needs of all students, meeting them at their level, making sure they are challenged, and that they spend most of their time with their peers?
I have to cough. Okay, so I'm gonna attempt to answer each of those parts separately with some specific examples. So I come from the state of Iowa. That's where I was a teacher, born and raised, super proud. And Iowa is actually on the cutting edge of special education, which is exciting and for some people very unexpected. And in Iowa, we use a system called RTI, which is response to intervention, for support for students with IEPs, students with 504 plans, and generally students who need additional support academics or with behavior. And I taught in an RTI system as a teacher. So in an RTI system, you know, teachers are always thinking about the needs of the students in front of them and creating specific interventions that can be enacted daily during intervention time to help students to extend their skills and meet proficiency on Common Core standards. Vermont is moving to this model starting next year. I guarantee you I'm the only candidate who has experience teaching in an RTI model. And so that plays a big role in how I see supporting students with IEPs and 504 plans. I believe that every student should have the opportunity to access curriculum at the grade level first and make an attempt. So something that I see commonly in classrooms is I see over scaffolding for students. I see curriculum that's watered down. It's made too easy. And students with IEPs and 504 plans don't have the opportunity to use their cognitive skills. And so I want to see an instructional system where we only provide scaffolds to the individual students who need them after they've had the opportunity to attempt to show their skills. That means that students will build more efficacy around trying hard things, but it will also ensure that the scaffolds that are provided to them by the teacher are very directly related to the needs that they have. And that will help all students, not just students with IEPs or 504 plans, but help English learners and students who are just generally maybe struggling with a certain Common Core skill. In the past, I've played many roles in IEP, 504, and educational support team meetings for developing student plans. Something, again, that I want to reiterate is that I get to know every single student for their strengths. And if you sit in an IEP meeting with me, no matter what student it is, you'll know that I'll have strengths to share at the beginning of the meeting about that student. And getting to know student strengths, every student's strengths in a school, helps us to look at an educational plan that actually meets their needs based on how they learn and who they are. Currently, I'm the LEA, and in that role, I sit in on IEP meetings every single day, and I participate in those meetings. I brainstorm ideas for educational support plans. I brainstorm accommodations with teams based on what I know about the students. And as the principal of HMS and acting LEA, the way that I would navigate those meetings and ensure that all families would be able to be active participants in developing student plans would be that I would build proactive relationships with families so that the first time they meet me is not in an IEP meeting. I have a sample 90-day plan that I rolled out to staff earlier today. And in that plan, I want to build many intentional opportunities to meet with families prior to the beginning of the school year. One of those ways that I've done that in the past is by holding a speed dating activity where teachers can volunteer to come in and families can volunteer to come in. And instead of talking about academics and instruction and curriculum, there's a menu of questions like, what was your education like? Tell me about how education is treated in your home. And families have the opportunity to rotate around and meet teachers, meet me, and talk through those questions so that we can build social communicative relationships with each other so that I'm not just the LEA in the meeting, I'm another person in this building who knows and can support each other. That also includes building strong relationships with our multilingual liaisons and ensuring that our multilingual liaisons are present for meetings where families have requested their support. As a bilingual Spanish speaker, I understand firsthand, having lived in another country where I was acquiring the language, how frustrating and confusing it can be to be in a space where you're expected to answer questions and know what's going on, and you don't have the language to articulate your thoughts. And finally, another piece would be allowing for virtual and flexible meeting times so that families, we can work around their schedules to ensure that the meetings actually prioritize their needs.
Thanks so much, Nikki. You actually covered the second two parts. So for the
Sorry,
no,
got
it's
ahead of
not. It's great. For the sake of time, I think.
I
think-
was just gonna say, if I can interject, so you're on our fourth question, nine, we'll be on our fifth question out of nine. And I know that we started late, but we'll probably have the two minutes left, so.
We can make it happen.
Thank you, Kim. Yes. Thank you. So for the sake of time, I'm going to skip to the next one, which is describe your ability with examples of a time when you were asked to bring people together, heal, and create a climate and culture that is restorative. If you don't have an example, describe how you would prepare to approach this critical and necessary work.
So there have been many examples of times when I've been tasked with that type of work, but I'm going to speak to the time when I was tasked with that work in my previous role as a ninth grade assistant principal in a high school in Chelsea, Massachusetts. During that time that I worked in the school, there were over 300 marijuana infractions over the course of a year, and that led to over 300 suspensions the year before I arrived at the school. What that data told me was that we had a community of students who were hurting. We had a school that wasn't meeting their needs, and they were looking for a sense of belonging outside of the classroom while they were in the building. So instead of suspending those students, I talked with those students, and I wanted to know, why are you not in class? What are the challenges, and why are you using marijuana? And in talking with them, I found that once again, they didn't feel a sense of belonging in school or in the classroom. And they wanted to feel connected to other people around them. And so they would meet up in the bathroom and use marijuana. So we developed a plan together to utilize some harm circles around substance abuse instead of suspending those students. If they were under the influence, they would be sent home for the day on a medical dismissal until they were able to come back sober so that we could do our harm circle. And students identified the adults who they would like to have during that difficult conversation in the circle with them. So that may be their parents, it may be adults in the building, it may be adults in the community, and students got to dictate who sat in that circle with us. Parents were always notified, but parents didn't always sit in that harm space if that was going to detract from students being able to confront the harm that happened and really think about what they needed moving forward. And so, you know, again, what we found was that students were hurting and they wanted to feel connected. And in doing those substance abuse harm circles, we reduced the school suspension rate for substance abuse from 300 to 0. And for the students that participated in substance abuse circles, they never were involved with marijuana in the school building again. And so that also included support from our substance abuse counselor, again, because it takes many people to help a community heal and to feel right. So that is an example of how I've worked to create a climate and culture that was restorative and met the needs of the community without pushing them.
Thank you.
Being a clear communicator was raised as the most important characteristic of Hunt's next principal. Can you please describe your communication style with staff and families? How do you handle conflict when it arises?
I think you'll learn pretty quickly, if you haven't already, that I'm a very direct communicator. And I believe in communication that's transparent and proactive, consistent, and preventative. And so, again, I will work to never make a call home to a family about a challenge that we're experiencing in the building with their child without first having interacted with them positively and building some sort of relationship or connection. So that way, when conflict arises, we have a reciprocal trust and understanding, so we can work through challenges on the same team, not against each other, which is what I often see in this district, is families feel very polarized or brought in against the school or against the situation. And instead, we have to work together on the same team to respond to conflicts as they arise or to meet the needs of a child. Oh, yeah.
Thanks. What have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate with families to ensure that they understand what is happening at school, know how to participate when there are needs, and have tools to support their students' learning?
So in my last role, I put out a weekly video message in English and Spanish to update families about what was happening in the community, and also sent a newsletter. So I would like to enact both of those things for families who like to read, families who like to listen, to make it easier for our multilingual liaisons to be able to interpret and translate messages rather than just sending them out via email. I want to make sure, again, that I'm proactive, that I also speak with families who have had marginalizing experiences with the school about the topics that they want to learn more about, and then having family nights consistently through the year where we address those topics. And that's where the restorative practitioners family liaison, Virginia Litchfield, really comes into play in this work, and that we can be really preventative in building relationships with families and then addressing the topics that they want to talk about before challenges arise.
What expectations would you set for teacher communication?
So just like I've set the goal for myself of not starting off with negative phone calls, I'm going to set the same expectations for teachers and staff. It doesn't feel good as a parent or a family member to receive a negative call from the school from someone you've never met before. And so I want to make sure there's time carved out at the beginning of the year for staff to meet with families, to be in community with families, to eat together, to talk together, to experience the community and its supports together. I'm really hoping, if I get this role, to have a block party in July where we can all come together. And again, making sure that the communication is regular, consistent, proactive, and that we're approaching every child's needs from an assets-based approach.
Finally, are there any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, so, one of the district's major goals is around restorative practices, which is something that I have a lot of experience with in my previous roles. And I actually don't even see it as restorative practices. I see it as restorative culture. So building a culture that is, built on relationships, but not just relationships between me and students, but teachers and students, families and students, community partners and students. And that takes time. And we can't actually use any restorative practices to respond to behavior needs until those relationships are set, because restorative practices don't work if there's not a relationship in place. And so restorative culture is foundational to who I am as a person and as a leader. And I have a quote from one of my favorite authors, Alice Walker, from Sent by Earth, A Message from the Grandmother Spirit, keeping in mind that restorative practices are rooted in the culture of indigenous cultures. Here's the quote that embodies how I see restorative culture. It is said that in the Babemba tribe of South Africa, when a person acts irresponsibly or unjustly, they are placed in the center of the village, alone and unfettered. All work ceases, and every person in the village gathers in a large circle around the accused individual. Then each person in the tribe speaks to the accused one at a time about all the good things the person in the center of the circle has done in their lifetime. All their positive attributes, their good deeds, strengths, and kindnesses are recited carefully and at length. The tribal ceremony lasts several days. At the end, the tribal circle is broken. A joyous celebration takes place, and the person is symbolically and literally welcomed back into the tribe. And that's how I see behavior and restorative culture and how it relates to our schools, making sure that we're not pushing kids out, that we're keeping them close to the warmth of the fire of the community. And that's it. And again, I'm Nikki, and thanks for having me.
Okay, so it will just be a minute or two, and then we will have our final candidate.
take out standing on front of the camera.
Yes, we will have you stand here. All right, everyone. So Jim is here. We will have you stay in front of the podium so that everyone online can see you.
Okay.
And our people who are asking questions are going to come up here so that the microphone can pick everyone up.
Sounds good.
Feel free to give a brief introduction of yourself.
Sure.
And then we'll get started.
All right, sounds good. So hi, I'm Jim Kelly, and I'm the interim principal here at Hunt since October 25th. I remember the day. And this is my 5th year here at Hunt, and I love being here, and I really deeply committed to this school.
There, it's nice to see you again. I have the first set of questions here, so I will kick it off with what is your vision for HMS? And in your response, can you please consider academics, socio-emotional learning, and the Hunt philosophy of teaching and learning belief statements?
Absolutely. So my vision in a nutshell is to make this like a primo school in the state. I just think that we have so many great things going on at the school, and I want us to shine. So what that looks like is, I know that at the base you need good social emotional pieces, right? So kids feel safe in your school. You need good restorative practices that deal with harms when they happen. And you need anti-racism work. So if you're doing RP without anti-racism, you really aren't going to work. So you've got to bring that together. And that's been a piece that's been missing that we're bringing in now. And then you also need to be working on the learning, of course. And so you need to have really strong, deeper learning where you're engaging people like now. They know why their learning is important in the moment. They're not just projecting out to some distant place. They really feel like I'm coming in, and that's not all the time, but they're coming in and feeling like it's worth being in the class, and they're seeing themselves in what they're studying, and they feel connected to it, and they feel excited to come to school. That's for the adults, the teachers, the kids. We want people to feel like this is an exciting place to be, and we want parents to feel like they're pretty happy their kids are going to school.
Thank you. And in your previous work, how have you created innovative and inclusive learning environments for all students?
Sure.
Please provide with specific examples.
Absolutely. So I'm going to start from sort of the micro. So I was a science teacher for 10 years at Edmonds. And so just in my own classroom, I really tried to create a situation where I was teacher as facilitator. Kids would come in, units had something that would hook them in, an anchoring event that would engage them, they'd be curious about. And then you would guide them through discovering where you wanted them to get to, the learning goals and targets that you had for them. So you didn't like spoil it by telling them up front, hey, we're going to learn all these things, and then we're just going to prove all the things that we learned. Like really boring. It's not what people get excited about. So engaging their curiosity and building the structures for that. So I did that in my classroom. I'm thinking of how one of the ways it was really exciting was we had a chemical engineering unit that I put together. And the first ones to solve the problem were a couple of EL students that were working together. And it showed me that it really works when you create learning that is accessible, because it's not just based on can you write about this right now at a certain level, or can you talk about it at a certain level. Give them really interesting problems to solve. Kids persist in difficulty. And then the next level is doing that at the team level. And so I was part of a team that really did expeditionary units. And so we were really getting kids to have real world problems that they were trying to work on. One was around working at problems in Uganda with 52 kids. One of the moments I really loved was we actually were doing a Zoom call, and it wasn't a Zoom call, I forget. We had something, and the kids were like leaning into the camera over there, and our kids were leaning into the camera, and we were learning about each other. It was pretty exciting. And they had to come up with sort of PSAs that sort of showed their learning about that. And then we did another expeditionary unit, which was around kind of developing your own company to solve the problem. And the culmination was we brought in people from those industries. And we went up to UVM at that time, the pretty new Davis Center. And they presented them. They pitched their ideas to these folks. And they got real feedback. And so that was pretty exciting. So that was authentic. And then, here, as a leader of a school, that's the kind of stuff I want to see us moving towards. We have hints of it, right? We've started to move towards humanities. So we start to get some cohesiveness across our social studies and our arts. And now we got to broaden it, right? So how do we keep building on that idea where we have super engaged learning? Kids feel excited about what they're learning, they see themselves in it. And so I've got that background, and I want to keep building towards that. And I think, we're having that work happening in PLCs. It's happening in science in terms of flipping, really guiding through. So we have, like this year in science, they first went up to Isle of Lamont, right, to look at fossils and start to be curious about fossils. Then they came back and they built the units where they could start to really investigate. figure out, what is that thing up there? And it was really fun. I remember going into the classrooms and I said, so what do you think? And they're like, well, I think, and they were like kind of going on, they were like on the right track, but they weren't there, but I like to spoil it. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. And I knew that they were going to get there eventually. So that was exciting. So that work is starting to happen here. And I think there'll be more of it.
So my last question is, in Burlington, we're committed to addressing racism in all its forms and dismantling white supremacy culture. So please describe how you demonstrate your commitment to anti-racism at the personal, social, and systemic levels.
Sure. So I think at the personal level, it goes way back from me, even before I had understood what a lot of those terms meant. In college, I spent a month, or actually a semester in India. I was a religion major. And so I spent 4 months over there. So I remember going to a place where the culture was different. I was now a minority, and it was just a completely different experience. I was looking back at the United States through the eyes of other people. So that was the beginning of sort of getting outside of my white cis male kind of framework. And then, when I was here in the district, I did the Washington group, which was a very intensive and focused effort to work on anti-racism work. And I still remember some of the learning I did in that. And that pushed me to another level. That was really very, very seminal work that I did. And then, I became personally just committed, reading books about it, and continuing to have dialogue with friends of mine from the rural majority, not to put them on the spot. That's my responsibility. But, I make mistakes and I get called out those. And so then we have those hard conversations, right? And I learn from those. So that's some of the personal level. And then the next part of the question is sort of my commitment to it at the social and systemic levels. I am deeply committed to it. And the reason I'm committed to it is because I've spent time, and actually my family is multiracial. So my wife is Tibetan, my kids are half Tibetan and half Irish American. And, we made a point of them going to India since they were months old and immersing them in their families. I speak Tibetan, immersed in Tibetan culture deeply. So I have a real appreciation for the value, not to tolerate diversity, but because diversity is a strength. Like, and I was a science teacher, so ecosystems are strong when they're diverse. They're in big trouble when they start to lose that diversity. And I feel that's the same thing with society. There are different ways of looking at the world, different ways of solving problems, different ways of saying it's a meaningful life. And that's enriching the more that we discover those things. So I feel deeply passionate about that. And so in school, the way I try to do that is, I try to keep bringing innovative things, right? So we did the Stop the Hate campaign, with Autumn Bengora. Was it amazing? No, it was a pilot. So we were learning from it, right? So we ran it through, and that was part of the purpose, is what went well and what do we need to learn from. Part of the learning was that we need to do more work as adults. It's hard to deliver a curriculum when you're still, at different stages of your learning. And so then I started to put together some anti-racism work monthly at our faculty meetings, white fragility, white supremacy culture work. So I started building that in. So we got to start. In fact, we were supposed to be doing one today. And then this kind of pushed that out. That was supposed to be another piece of work today. But that's something that I'm committed to if I'm the principal next year, to keep doing the professional development. We need the mindset shifts in our adults, because then they can actually do the work with fidelity. And I don't, the racism that's in here, of course it's here. We're part of our society. It is everywhere. And I think it's really more about unconscious bias mostly. And a lot of that work is uncovering that, waking that up, seeing that, because I think I have a staff that's willing to do the work, but they just have to really deepen their understanding. And they've already done a lot of that this year.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
Hey, Josh.
This first question has 3 parts. The first part is roughly a quarter of our students receive special education services through their individualized education plan, and other students have individualized plans to ensure their language acquisition, health, and other needs are met. How do you meet the diverse needs of all students, meeting them at their level, making sure they are challenged, and that they spend most of their time with their peers?
Yeah, so I mean, already they do spend most of their time with their peers, right? We do integrate that already. We do have some intervention classes that provide some additional support. One of the things that we did this year that's interesting around that is we have what's called win time, which is what I mean time. And so students are getting sort of just-in-time support around their learning, and that could either be extension or it could be support that kind of boosts them up to help them in what they're trying to learn. And they don't know who they are in that class. Everyone's integrated in that. It's not perfect. That's something that we started this year. We have work to do to make that even better. But we already are really trying to already have integration. Again, it's getting better at it. It's making, and I think the deeper learning piece is going to really help that, because as we create those more kind of engaging projects, we'll have more experience where like those EL students, right, are the first ones to solve the problem. All the other people looking at them, going, how did you do that? Wow, you know, because that's not typically the experience that they get in the class, or some students who are receiving special education. So that's part of some of the work. And I think we've got some things going, but I think we can really take it to another level.
Second part, what role have you played on IEP 504 or educational support teams in developing student plans?
Yeah, so a lot. So I've been a part of those as a teacher, you know, talking about how kids are doing in my class and what can support them better. I've done that as an assistant principal, you know, acting as like an LE, what they call LEA, right? So you're basically a representative of the agency there to be a part of that, making sure that things are going smoothly and that the needs are being addressed, and now as the interim principal. So I've been part of, you know, IEP meetings, Act 264 meetings, which is a broader thing. We bring in community partners to try to solve problems when we feel like we're stuck and we need fresh new ideas. And then I've been a part of, you know, manifestation meetings where kids sort of get themselves in some trouble and we're kind of like, wow, is this because of what, you know, their disability that's on their IEP, or is this, you know, something else? So I've been a part of a variety of those things. So
Third part, as the principal of HMS and acting LEA, how would you navigate through these meetings? How do you ensure that all families can be active participants in developing their students' plan, including those who are new to the process and families who might not speak English?
yeah, so I mean, by law, all families have to be part of that. So that's happening. We make sure that that happens. We make sure that liaisons are there. And what's beautiful about Burlington's liaison system is they're not just translators. They truly are, you know, helping to bridge cultural divides, to communicate, you know, in the language that can be understood if you're from a different place. And, you know, my wife grew up in India. I mean, the educational system there and here is vastly different, right? So when we talk about that, that gives me an insight. It also helps me when I'm at a meeting to understand where some parents are coming from, because I know many of our parents from other places have had a very similar educational experience, and this one looks pretty foreign to them. And so that helps me, you know, bridge that gap a little bit. So by law, they have to be there. We make sure that happens. And, you know, we use our liaisons, and also we're just committed to making sure that they understand that we're not doing something to them, we're doing something to them.
And then the next question is, describe your ability with examples of a time when you were asked to bring people together, heal, and create a climate and culture that is restorative. If you don't have an example, describe how you would prepare to approach this critical and necessary work.
Yeah, so one of the things that comes to mind is at the beginning of this year, you know, we know that we have a lot of work to do with our students, the voting majority, to make them feel comfortable, safe, and like full members of our community. And that's true for our staff as well, because now we're fortunate we have more staff from the voting majority. So at the beginning of the year, Sparks and me and some other leaders met with parents, predominantly from Hunt, from the voting majority, to talk about some of the issues that they had and some of the concerns they had about their kids' experience and what they wanted for them. And so that was a very, very good meeting in terms of us listening and trying to learn and being open and not being defensive. It was a good meeting, and not everything was, you know, really something you want to hear, right? So we had work to do. But I think what was exciting is what came out of that is that then I started working with the Partnership for Change Task Force, which is a group of those parents that then came up with this really wonderful idea. How do we take kids from the global majority and some of our white students who've had conflict? They've been on the harming side, they've been on the, you know, the affected side. And how do we think of a program that's going to start trying to bring kids together? And they were excited about boxing. And so they got this idea, they pitched it to Sparks, they pitched it to me. And basically we formed a partnership school to family where we worked on that from basically October, I think it was, or maybe actually November, right? October, I just barely started. So we started working that in November, and then we got this pilot program going, and we got the transportation, you know, we got connection to our after school program, and then we got kids going regularly to this program, and the feedback we've gotten sort of anecdotally initially is really positive. It's a great experience for those kids. And we did see anecdotally some positive things happening for those kids when they came back to school, the way they talked about things. So that was a really nice flow from really partnering with some things.
Thank you.
So being a clear communicator was raised as the most important characteristic of Hunt's Next principle. Please describe your communication style with staff and families. How do you handle conflict when it arises?
Sure. So I think the first thing is being a really good listener. So I know, like, when I'm here, I have to create ways for people to talk to me, ways for people to connect to me, feedback loops. And then, with my staff, basically I do either once or twice a week, I send out like sort of the principals sort of thing about what's going on in the school. For families, I need to do better. I've sent out some, and then I got busy, and I'm like, oh shoot, I didn't send out a newsletter for way too long a time. And so now I've been trying to get better with that. So I think it's through newsletters, and it's through, just every interaction. So like I'm on the phone with families all the time. And I was on the phone with families all the time as assistant principal. And as an assistant principal, especially, it was not always for the, families weren't always happy to hear from me. And I think I was pretty good about letting them know that we're partners in this. Kids are going to mess up. That's part of I messed up plenty as a kid. And our job is the adults that care about and know these kids from different ways, is to work together to help them. And that's what I try to communicate to families. So that's at that very kind of rudimentary level. And then it's some of those bigger system things like newsletters, going to PTO, making sure you get the updates. And it's like anything, you get better at it, right? So those are new things some of them are not new things, and some of them are, and I'm trying to improve my systems on those. But I think it's essential, because I think family-school partnership is critical for success of kids.
What have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate with families to ensure that they understand what is happening at school, know how to participate when there are needs, and have tools to support their students' learning?
Sure. And then one thing I'll mention, so I mentioned some of those things, right? So I think having regular newsletters that go out, eventually I'd like to have things where they might make a coffee with the principal. That's happened in the past. One of the things I'm excited about is in the fall, through the school advisory group, we had parents, we had students, we had teachers, we had money to spend. It was kind of, for equity. And one of the things that came out of that was a family ambassador coordinator. And so I was like so excited about that, because that's been my passion. So how do we start to build this bridge? Because kids are only going to be successful if we're partnering and working together. But it was the passion of the parents, it was the passion of the students, and it was the passion of the teachers that were part of that committee. And so we actually have a job description that's going to be getting posted pretty soon, and we're going to be hiring that person. So that's someone that's really going to be able to recruit. And the idea is that they recruit folks from different, representing different groups in our school. So they from the majority, from students requiring special needs and special education, different SES groups, and so forth. And so that we really are inviting them into our schools, either to talk with classes, to help communicate, parent to parent, because I think that's the way we often hear things better. We hear from people that are our peers, and so that's a way I'm very excited about next year. So that's going to be paid for and budgeted for, and it's going to be exciting.
What expectations would you set for teacher communication?
Yeah, and I think we have work to do. I think too often the communication is limited to grades, report cards, and often when it's negative, like when something goes wrong in the classroom. And so what I really want to work on is, we know you've got to bank away. You've got to start talking about the positive things, because every kid that comes to our school has positive things. And if we're just not getting that out to parents, they get tired of hearing what their kid did wrong another time, another year. And that's unfair. And then if people are seeing kids that way, that's unfair, because then we start creating what we're seeing. So I think it's really about starting to encourage staff early on, at the beginning of a year, to start getting out some really positive cycles of communication with families where you're catching kids doing good, because they are doing good, and not waiting to, through the honeymoon period, and then, oh, yeah, you're back in some hole, or you're in the same problem that somebody else talked about. And then it's also now building up that partnership, because now you've banked away, you've built up trust, and not all families come here with that trust based on their own experiences and their kids' experiences over the years. And so I think that's hugely.
And finally, are there any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. I think, for me, just even, I used to teach in Colchester many, many, many moons ago, and I moved to Burlington on purpose. And some people don't want to work in the district where they live. And I felt just the opposite about that. I'm a big believer that, it takes a village. You want to be part of your community. And people get to see your warts, and they get to see what you did well. And that's how you grow. And so that was when I came to Edmonds, and I was there for 10 years. And I feel the same way now. Like, I have spent that 10 years and these 5 years building up relationships. I mean, so many people in this room I know in a number of different ways and work that we've done together. And I think that really helps me to start, and the learning curve of this year helps me for next year, if I'm the principal, to really hit the ground running. Not to be, because no matter who comes in, no matter how amazing they are, they've got to build those relationships before they can do something. And you've got to have a constructivist approach. As a teacher, I know that's the best way to get that direction, the alignment, and the commitment to get through, challenges. If you just top down it all, bump comes in the road, everyone scatters, and you're in trouble, And so I think I'm really well positioned to build off of my mistakes, the learning that I've done. I'm humble about that. I ask people, come in, tell me, what did I do wrong? All right, I'm going to work on that, And you should know that I'm the kind of person that is always working to get better. Like, that's just in my nature. It's what I think as a teacher. Hopefully people saw that as an assistant principal. I just tried to get better at my job as I understood it better and better. And, it's a big difference from an assistant principal to a principal. And hopefully people have seen that maybe I've gotten better since October 25th. So, and I'm committed to that. I really love this community. See the school shine.
I just need to pull something up on my screen, so just a moment. Okay, thank you all so much for attending today. And thank you for your patience. I know we've gone over a little bit of time, but we really appreciate you being here. The hiring committee is very interested in your feedback. We've developed a feedback form for attendees of tonight's forum and for those watching online. At the back of the room, for those of you who are in person, on that black cart, there is a document that has another QR code that you can submit the forum on. This is also available on the BSD webpage dedicated to these forums. It's important to know that the submission window for completed surveys will close at noon tomorrow, so noon Thursday, May 5th. So please fill it out as soon as you can. The hiring committee will review your feedback before they make any recommendation to the superintendent. Again, thank you all so much and have a great night. Thank you.
Stop.